Good afternoon and welcome to About Health. I'm David B. Feldman, psychologist, professor, author, blogger, podcaster, and your host. Today, our topic is taking care of our hearts. I should admit right up front that the title of today's show is a bit of a bait and switch. Yes, we're going to talk a little today about how to take care of our hearts in the physical sense, what to do to keep our hearts healthy and beating for a long time to come. But we all know there's another, more metaphorical and perhaps even spiritual way of talking about our hearts. It's the organ to which we often attribute love, care, sadness, and many of our deepest feelings. In fact, in some Eastern spiritual traditions, there's not even a clear dividing line between the heart and the mind. Our guest today, a cardiologist specializing in the care of people with heart failure, is comfortable talking about the heart in both ways. She has a beautiful way of working with patients in some of the most harrowing medical situations you can imagine, while not forgetting that they are more than the sum of their parts. So today, we'll have a wide-ranging conversation about what it's like to be a cardiologist. We'll ask her what drew her to the field in the first place, how she approaches taking care of patients, and what lessons she's drawn from her work. Indeed, joining me by phone today is Dr. Anu Lala. Dr. Lala is an associate professor of cardiology and population health science and policy at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. Her clinical interests encompass all aspects of the management of heart failure, including the care of patients with mechanical circulatory support devices and those undergoing heart transplantation. In addition to caring for patients, she serves as the director of heart failure research and as data coordinating center leadership for the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute's Cardiothoracic Surgery Network, and also leads a fellowship training program in advanced heart failure and transplant. She has authored more than 75 scientific publications, and in 2016 was named the American Heart Association Young Professionals Society honoree for her service and commitment to education and the promotion of cardiovascular health awareness. In 2020, she was also recognized with the Proctor H. Harvey Teaching Award by the American College of Cardiology. Dr. Anu Lala, welcome to About Health.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited about having this conversation with you. I've had an opportunity to peruse through your work and your website, and I look forward to learning from you in this process as well.
Oh, sounds wonderful. I really look forward to this also. You know, regular listeners will know that I often like to begin by asking about my guests' personal stories, because it really gives a sense of why the topic is so important to them. So let me just ask you, what drew you to become first a physician, but also specifically a cardiologist?
Yeah, thanks so much. Ironically, I think, everyone has sort of a formative experience, I think, in their childhood, or multiple rather. And for me, well, I could start out by saying my father is a cardiologist, so I was exposed to that as a child. We were raised, my younger brother and I were raised to very much be friends with our parents as well. So I felt like as I saw my father, establishing his own cardiology practice, even studying for the cardiology boards, we were keenly aware of when those things were happening. So it felt like we were in a way participating in that journey and process alongside him. I was very just drawn to cardiac physiology. I remember in school, I did a project on it as a seventh grader, and it really, really kind of, when you lose yourself in something, that you're intrinsically attracted or drawn to it. And then I had an experience when I was, I think, in sixth grade. My grandmother was visiting from India. She was elderly, and one night we were sitting in our family room after dinner, and she complained of acute chest pain.
Hmm.
She started, she was nauseous. She had pain that radiated to her left arm. I mean, really, sort of now in retrospect, a very classic picture for a heart attack. And my
Oh, wow.
father recognized it in the moment. And immediately, I remember, went to his office, brought an EKG machine home, gave her aspirin and morphine, had a tub for her to vomit in, and of
Hmm.
course, said, "Listen, maybe we should, not maybe, but we should take you to the emergency room. We should take you to the hospital." And she said, "Absolutely not. That is not what I want. Whatever this is, I want this to be treated and addressed at home, and I trust you. And whatever you think is right is fine with me as long as it's at home."
Oh, wow.
And I remember seeing that. I remember him telling me distinctively, "Put your hand on her wrist and feel for her pulse and make sure that it's regular. That's your job." And as he administered the morphine and gave her aspirin, sort of like old school ways of dealing with heart attacks, I was just so profoundly impacted by the experience. And she thankfully survived. She rested, and we really treated her the way we used to treat heart attacks before, coronary interventions with stents. And that connection that I felt with that experience, and also with my fingers on her pulse, stayed with me uh, in a way that was indelible. So much so that I can actually read this to you for my essay to an application to get into medical school. I actually have it here because my brother gave this to me as a gift. It's sitting in my office. I'm looking at it right now as I speak to you, and it's a picture of me and my grandmother, who I was incredibly close to because we would spend our summers with her in India. And it starts out by the pulse, the pulse, the pulse. I feel my grandmother's pulse in every patient's hand I am blessed to encounter, reminding me of my passion for service and my love for the field of cardiovascular medicine. And that I should preface it by saying that I believe that was my essay, I think going into residency or cardiology. I can't remember quite,
Sure.
but nonetheless, you can see so many years later that experience has really, really left an impression on me. And so I think that combination um, of that experience, and also watching my father go through things, as well as an innate attraction to the field, um, led me to just know that I wanted to pursue cardiology.
It's a beautiful story, and I think it really says a lot. It really sets up the rest of the conversation, which is not only going to be about the science of cardiology, but also really the heart in the metaphorical sense. And before we get into those details, can you just talk about your practice now as a cardiologist? Who do you generally take care of? What sorts of problems are they facing? And what are some of the most common sorts of procedures you're involved with today?
There is, cardiology and medicine in general in the Western world has just become so increasingly specialized. Um, so much so that we joke like, "Oh, I'm only in charge of taking care of this one specific problem." So along those lines, I am a cardiologist across the spectrum of heart disease, but I have specialized in an area that is named heart failure and transplant cardiology. I'm not a fan of that terminology, and
Hmm.
I am quite vocal about that. And there's actually somewhat of a movement to try and change it. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But specifically, this subspecialty within cardiology addresses those patients wherein the heart function is abnormal and patients have symptoms. And the symptoms are most commonly shortness of breath, but are also accompanied by signs of extra fluid hanging around in the body. because the heart is essentially your intrinsic plumbing system, right? And so if that
Sure.
is dysfunctional in any way, it leads to a flooding of sorts of the body. And um, many of these patients, not all, but a certain population who go on to have advanced symptoms and advanced disruptions in heart function go on to requiring a transplantation of the heart, or a mechanical pump to replace the heart or bypass the heart when it's not able to carry out its own functions to supply blood and oxygen to the rest of the body.
So you mentioned a second ago that you really don't like the term heart failure, and I've heard you say that before on previous interviews. So without getting too technical, and you've already started this, can you just tell us what doctors usually mean when they say heart failure, and also why you don't think that this is the best way to refer to the condition?
Yeah, thanks so much, David. This is something I feel so passionately about it. I think to answer your first question, what heart failure refers to is the syndrome that I just spoke about, which is a combination of abnormalities in the structure and function of the heart muscle combined with symptoms. And those symptoms, like I said, are generally those of having too much fluid on board or a dysregulation of fluid management. Most commonly, that manifests as shortness of breath, but it can also manifest as having swelling of the legs. It can have manifestations of feeling full very easily, nausea, um, shortness of breath, particularly while walking,
Hmm.
even sometimes while lying down. So that's the syndrome that is coined heart failure. The word and the term are not my favorite because I believe in empowerment and I believe in really enabling individuals to take care of their own selves. And I think the minute we coin a term as as failure, I think it limits patients' hope. I think it also makes them feel disempowered, and I think
Yeah, makes sense.
it may potentially really lead to a disengagement of their own care. I would say that's on the patient angle or patient side of things, but also amongst each other and colleagues. Within cardiology itself, general cardiologists or prevention cardiologists are not excited about sending their patients to heart failure cardiologists
Huh.
because there's an implication that there's failure all around, right? Nobody, I don't think there is any word in the English language that is as negative as the word failure. And I think whether we talk about that in, I mean, you're an expert in the mind and how it processes words, but to me, the minute you say that word, it's just disempowering, it's debilitating, and particularly for those patients who are young and have disruptions in their heart function and symptoms, I think it is, we do them a disservice by using that term. I am a proponent of talking about heart function more so than failure. And in fact, in Canada, that's what they do. They call them heart function clinics.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I'm also a huge fan as a clinical researcher of involving patients in our conversations and then the design of studies that we do. And if you talk to patients, invariably, they prefer the term function over failure. I think we can, there's so many, I could go on and on as to why I think this is important, but also crucial to this conversation is that there's a continuum of health and disease, right? It's not these finite points that we have more traditionally seemed to adopt in our culture. And so when we talk about function, we can talk about the maintenance of health, we can talk about the preservation of function, we can talk about the restoration of function if it's perturbed, and we can talk about the replacement of function if and when it's necessary. So it just leaves the conversation much more open to talk about with patients, to engage with patients. And, I can give you an example.
Yeah, go ahead.
Young individuals, I have a young individual right now I'm caring for who happens to be a school teacher and has children of his own. And he has abnormal heart function and he has this syndrome. So it's accompanied by symptoms of shortness of breath and nausea, abdominal pain. And he he says, "Doc, just don't tell me that I have heart failure. Talk to me about what's going on. Tell me what medications I need. I'm here. I'm here for it. I want to get better. But as a teacher, I never tell my students that they're failing, and I don't fail at things in life. So let's get that out of our conversation." And that is just one of many anecdotal examples that really stick with me. And so in my conversations, I steer away from that. I think the word failure is also sort of a moral term, um, and there's this we underestimate the impact that um, that word can have in terms of potentially inflicting guilt on a patient. Oftentimes,
Hmm.
heart failure or disruptions in function are genetically mediated or are unbeknownst to us.
Right. It's not
It's
their
not
fault.
always a patient exactly. It's not their fault. And so, you know, again, particularly for those young folks that have this, it's like, well, what did I do wrong? And so unpacking that and disentangling all of the negative emotions that come with that word is oftentimes, I think, most of what we spend our visits dealing with. And that takes away from time that we could spend on empowering patients, informing them as to what can be done to improve the function, or if in certain cases, replace the function. So, long-winded answer. Forgive me for going on and on, but you can tell how passionate I am about this because I really believe that the words we use matter in the care that we are able to provide for individuals.
Yeah, I worked as a psychologist in a palliative care setting for a while, including with patients with quote unquote heart failure. And one of the things
Yeah,
that I never liked about the term is that it sounds like something that's all or nothing. And you sort of talked about this when you talked about heart function. It sounds like your heart has just stopped, it's failed. But it's not like that,
right.
right? It's a condition people can live with for a long time in some cases, right?
That's right. That's right. That's absolutely right. I always say that to patients as well. Failure implies, okay, this is the end, right? And in some cases, it's actually the beginning. If you're seeking to replace the function of the heart, right?
Mm.
So what can I say? I really try to steer away from that word. I think it's really important to mention that by no way am I diminishing the severity or the gravity of the disease state.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So there's no question that there is something that needs to be addressed, that's associated with morbidity and mortality, and it's a major, major public health issue. Um, but you can address it without, I think, using those terms. And in fact, and this is research I hope to further develop, one may argue it may be more empowering to patients to partake in their own care if it was labeled something a little bit more open-minded and positive, or at least neutral.
Yeah. Well, I'm David B. Feldman, and my guest today on About Health is Dr. Anu Lala, cardiologist and associate professor at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. And we're having a wide ranging conversation about what it's like to care for patients with heart conditions and how we can care for our own hearts. Because this is a pre recorded interview, unfortunately, we're not able to take calls today. So, Dr. Lala, I also know that you're a spiritual person, which really intersects with your work as a cardiologist. What spirituality did you grow up with? And how do you think about spirituality now?
Thanks so much for asking. Um, I think my spiritual upbringing has a lot to do with who I am and where I am today. Um, I grew up with a Hindu upbringing, and so I consider myself Hindu. But what I really loved about how we were raised was we were taught that all religions essentially are conveying the same message in different ways. I also went to a school called the Vivekanand Vidyapit in New Jersey, and it's based on the teachings of a really great Indian philosopher by the name of Swami Vivekanand, um, who was a great philosopher. He was a spiritual teacher, and he really emphasized the universality of religions and really drew more of a focus and placed more of an importance on spirituality over rituals and belief systems,
Hmm.
and really kind of steered away from differences and focused on commonalities. And so growing up, we would learn about, from the Quran, the Bible, we learned about Taoism. I mean, across the world. And it was just so amazing as an adolescent when you're really kind of seeking questions. You're seeking answers to questions like, why am I here? What's the purpose? Um, I mean, we have those questions throughout our lives, but I think as an adolescent, you're really kind of like struggling to figure out where your place is in
For
the
sure.
world. And so to have that reassurance, that there was sort of this connected universal truth, to how different communities and religions put forth messaging was actually very affirming. I also loved the notion that um, his teachings were extremely empowering. It was not guilt inducing, or fear inducing, and I that really really helped me. And so I think I loved um, anything that brought forth self-awareness and allowed me to think about how I could be better. I think that, I was just talking, I got my hair cut yesterday. I was talking to the stylist who was doing my hair, and she was saying, I was wondering, I grapple with what's my purpose right now, et cetera. And I said, that's so intrinsic to who we are as human beings. We do grapple with that all the time. And I think our purpose is to continue to evolve,
Hmm.
and and to seek to better ourselves. And so I think spirituality and self-help sections in Barnes and Noble are a part of that process, and I the idea that we are all connected, that we're all similar on the inside, that our struggles are similar, is very reassuring to me. And I think one thing that I love, if I could, forgive me if I'm going on and on, but one thing I love about heart transplant medicine is it's such a reminder of our oneness, of our connectedness. Because you could have, as just an example, a man of, let's say, Black race, um, from a different part of the country end up receiving a heart from a different gender, a different race, a different part of the country, different belief systems. But when that heart goes into that ailing person's body, it works just like any other healthy heart does, right?
Hmm.
And
We're all
so,
human.
right. I mean, if that's not a reminder of our oneness, then I don't really know what is, right? And so to me, that is like it's a super beautiful reminder of that. I think I'm grateful to you for having this conversation because it allows me to be reminded of that fact as well. And so that's one thing I really, really love about heart transplant medicine as a subspecialty and what I get to practice. I just saw a transplant patient just before speaking to you, and so it's a beautiful reminder of that oneness and that commonality we all have.
It's a beautiful message, and I think so important for us all to hear. Um, eh, well, from the sublime, and I promise we'll get back to this idea of spirituality and how it affects the way you think about patience. Um, but from the sublime to the much more practical, I wonder if we could spend a little time talking about how to care for our hearts physically. Uh, this is kind of a basic question to start out, but I think it's maybe worth asking. Can you just walk us through what the heart actually does and how it works?
Sure, I love talking about that. So the heart is so amazing because it is responsible for the rhythm of life, right? That's our pulse. It is responsible for pumping healthy blood and nutrient-rich blood, oxygen-rich blood to the rest of our entire body. And it's responsible for collecting blood that from which nutrients and oxygen have been extracted from the rest of our body, sending it to our lungs to get refueled, if you will, with oxygen. So that's where that blue blood, which is where it has the oxygen and nutrients have been extracted from the rest of the body,
Hmm.
is sent from the heart to the lungs to become oxygen nutrient rich again. So that's where it turns into red blood. And then that comes back to the heart and it is sent out to the rest of the body again. And so the cycle continues on and on and on from birth to death. And that pump that is governed by the heart beating, right? But from an electrical impulse that originates in the heart as well. Like I think this is so wild. If you took a piece of heart tissue out and you looked at it under a microscope, you will see that it has an intrinsic beat to itself,
Oh, wow.
right? That's so unbelievable. I mean, speak of like a sort of a spiritual experience, right? I mean, that is the rhythm of life, so to speak. Whatever you believe in, there is some sort of energy force that is allowing for that beat to be automated and to be generated. All of those individual cells constitute our heart muscle. So that is the function of the heart, if you will. And then how we take care of it. Did you want me to get into that now, or did you want to follow up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, given this key role, I of the heart, obviously, we can't survive without this rhythm, right? You called it the
Right.
rhythm of life. Um, if you could list, say, three things that you wish everybody knew about how to keep their heart healthy in the physical sense, what would those be?
Great question. I think first and foremost is we are what we eat, and so an overall healthy eating pattern includes whole foods, lots of fruits and vegetables, lean protein, nuts and seeds, cooking in in oils like olive oil and canola oil. These are things that are really, really important. So you want to create a healthy eating pattern, and you also want to maximize the things I just mentioned. You want to limit things like artificially sweetened drinks. You obviously want to limit things like alcohol. You want to limit excessive sodium. You want to limit processed meats, refined carbs, like things
Hmm.
with a lot of added sugars. Like my kids are 10 and 7, and they know to look on the labels for how many added sugars are in everything. So I I really, Dr. Fuster, Valentine Fuster, who's our was our previous director of the Mount Sinai Fuster Heart Hospital rather. He really has honed in on this concept of how healthy eating and healthy patterns begin in childhood. And so I think that that's something that I've tried to imbibe in our family. So one would be to eat better. I think that's really, really important. I think number two, and maybe not in the same, not in that particular order, but equally important is the importance of being active. We have to move.
Hmm.
I think for multiple different reasons, for our physical health, and we can talk about the mental health aspect of it separately, but what the American Heart Association recommends is 150 minutes of moderate aerobic activity a week. I think that's very doable, right? It's even if you're doing 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, you meet that threshold. Um,
So that could just be taking a walk.
yeah, it could be just walking more, right? I mean, it's as simple as just following how many steps you have. So I think that that is crucial. And I would say the third thing, if you had to push me, I would say, I mean, there's so many, but I think just really quick, the weight is connected to being active. It's connected to what we eat, and that's connected to cholesterol. That's connected to blood sugar. So I'd say if you can eat better, be more active, and get a healthy amount of sleep, which is generally considered about 7 hours, 7 to 9 hours a day for adults, I think your heart will thank you for it.
Yeah, I once heard a cardiologist say, going back to what you were saying about being active, that not exercising is almost as bad for our hearts as smoking. And I don't think he meant to minimize the effects of smoking, of course, but to really show how important exercise is. Is this an exaggeration? Or is exercise really that important? This kind of moderate exercise you're talking about?
I don't think the importance of exercise could be um, emphasized enough. There are actually studies that show that the number of steps we do are associated with our heart outcomes. I mean, this is actually a study in the Journal of American Medical Association. And it's really, I mean, I can get into the specifics of it if it's helpful, but really over 7,000, it's exactly 7,700 was the number that was found in that study to be associated with better outcomes. I mean, it cuts your risk of mortality in adults. I think that's really, really important and helpful. So I think there is something to these smartwatches and these pedometers that we're using. Over 7,000 steps, I think, should be considered a minimum for us to achieve a day.
And of course, people are at different ages. They have different abilities to walk or do certain exercises. So there are other ways of getting moderate exercise, of course, as well. If the 7,700 isn't possible for people, would I be right to say that?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think, there's swimming for individuals, there's rowing people like a lot. There is a lot of people are huge fans of Peloton and the bike. So I think whatever it is that is satisfying and gratifying to you, take that up and make that your own. Um, the point is just to be more active.
Yeah. Where does stress fit in here in terms of taking care of your heart physically? How much do our emotional states affect our heart health?
I I don't think we can emphasize that enough as well. In fact, the American Heart Association, has outlined the Life Essential Eight, right, which are the key measures for us improving and maintaining our cardiovascular health. We just talked about two of them: eating better, being more active, quitting smoking if we're smoking, getting a healthy amount of sleep, managing our weight, controlling our cholesterol, managing our blood sugar, managing our blood pressure. But what's inextricably linked is our psychological health, right? And to me, that spans our mental health, our emotional health, our spiritual health. And stress is a huge component of that, right? That
Sure.
compromises our psychological state. I'm so grateful that cardiovascular societies are recognizing that and they're placing importance on it. and there's more and more research and funding being devoted to understanding the inextricable link between our psychological well-being and health and our cardiovascular health, right? Why is it that when we're anxious we feel our heart pounding? I mean, if that's not a demonstration of the direct link between the mind and the body, or the mind and the heart, I don't know what else is, right?
Mm.
Why is it that when we're angry, we feel our heart pounding? So I think we cannot overemphasize the importance of well-being. And I consider it, that it may not be what's in the physical life's essential eights that I just mentioned, but to me, it's just as important, if not more. And I think the more we evolve in our understanding of the mind heart body connection, the the more we integrate our care, the better we all stand to be for it.
As you're talking about the way that our mental states affect our heart health, I'm reflecting in my own mind on what I mentioned in the intro, which is that the word heart has a couple of different broad meanings, right? It's come to represent both the physical organ pumping in our chests, as
Mm.
well as so much more psychologically and spiritually in so many cultures. Uh, I wonder what your reflections are on why that is, or how that came to be, or what the effects of that are in your work with patients.
There's so much I can say about this. I feel like the heart it's both the pump and the regulator of rhythm, as we just spoke about. It's common to all of us, but it's also, we connect with each other through our hearts, right? We think it's through our mind, but we always say like heart to heart, have a heart to
Mm,
heart conversation. And what does that mean? And I think that I it's really about establishing human connection, right? It's um it's recognizing that our human experience is common. And I think our heart is a great metaphor for that. I also love how the heart is a metaphor for how we need to take care of ourselves, right? So what is the function of the heart? Going back to your earlier question, it's it's responsible for pumping nutrient rich, oxygen rich blood to the rest of the body, right? But it has, in order to function, it needs to supply blood and oxygen to itself so it can
hmm,
sustain its own function, right? And I think about that as a metaphor for us as human beings, right? We're constantly on the go. We're giving, giving, giving. We're trying to meet deadlines. We're trying to take care of others. We're trying to ensure that we've addressed, the bills, and taking addressing all the demands that are placed on us, but we oftentimes don't take care of ourselves, right?
yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
the heart is a huge metaphor for that, because when the heart does not, when there are problems with the vessels that supply blood to the heart so it can continue to function, that's when we have a heart attack. That's coronary artery disease. The coronary arteries are the arteries that are devoted to supplying the heart with its own blood and its own oxygen and nutrients. And so when there are blockages in those arteries, the heart doesn't have enough blood and nutrients and oxygen to function, and then we have a heart attack. Or we go on to developing what's called heart failure. And to me, that's such a beautiful metaphor for how we have to take the time out in our own days to take care of ourselves, to tune in with ourselves, to practice mindfulness and self-awareness, and to nurture ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I'm David B. Feldman, and today on About Health, my guest is Dr. Anu Lala, cardiologist and associate professor at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. And we're talking about what it's like to be a cardiologist, the kinds of challenges that patients face, and how we can care for ourselves and our own hearts. Because this is a pre recorded interview, unfortunately, we're not able to take calls today. So, Dr. Lala, we've been talking this whole time about the kinds of patients you encounter, the kinds of really life and death situations, in part, that you deal with as you're working with patients who have heart functioning difficulties, also known as heart failure. And I wonder, what's what's the hardest thing about your work with patients for you, and why?
Um, I think the hardest thing is working within the confines of our current health system. I think overcoming barriers is the challenge, right? It's
Hmm.
about it's working within, and it's not this is not placing blame on any one specific, certainly not individual or any one system per se, but it's challenging to be able to have meaningful, heartfelt, conversations with individuals who may be facing a life-threatening situation within the 15 to 20-minute time slot. It's
Yeah.
challenging to get prior authorization for medications we know can be life-saving. It's challenging to make sure that notes are written and signed on time, and also very careful. And um, I think we all, I don't mean to speak for everybody, but I certainly for myself, I certainly want to be able to deliver care that I hope that my family would receive, right? I am a big fan of the golden rule, do
Hmm.
unto others. And I find it sometimes challenging to do that within the confines of our current medical system.
As you're talking about the system, and you mentioned time, something came up in my mind. I, as you know, I'm a psychologist, and I do a lot of collaborating with physicians on research, also sometimes on patient care. And in our more candid conversations, one of the frustrations I've often heard from them is just how little time they have with patients. And you mentioned that a moment ago. For instance, I teach about hope. And one of the things I'm interested in is how doctors can talk with patients in a way that nurtures hope without giving false hope, of course. Um, but what I often hear from doctors is that there's just not enough time for them to even consider hope in their conversations with patients, let alone with patients' families. So it's really not quote unquote their job. Um,
Mm.
to me, it's a real conundrum, and I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I think hope is so essential. So I always say there's hope. um, that is the whole reason for being, right? I mean, so I think emphasizing hope is so critical. I think it's also empowering. It also allows for a more positive, uplifting approach. And I would say that even though I just said that what I find most difficult is operating within the confines of certain time restraints, I think there are ways to convey hope from the get go. I think this comes back, not to beat a dead horse, but again, to how important the words we use are, right? If we use empowering words, I think it inherently conveys hope. I think that's one thing that's really important. One thing that I have used that's very helpful is I ask my patients what it is that brings them joy,
Hmm.
right? What is their why, so to speak? And it's oftentimes a question that takes them aback. They're like, "What do you mean?" But I remember um, just recently I was seeing a patient in the office, and I was like, "What is it that gets you? What is it that really touches you? What is your raison d'être? What is your why?" And they were able to so clearly articulate that it's playing with my grandchildren,
Hmm. Beautiful.
and it's being able to watch them, being able to go to the park with them. That is it. Like, that brings me indescribable joy. That is my reason. And I'm very grateful for when an individual is able to articulate that, because then you can meet them where they seek to be, or you can seek to get them where they want to be, right? So if an individual's goal and aspiration is to stay alive and be with their grandchildren, then I take it a little step further. Like, what is it that you seek to do with them? Is it, I want to be at home with them and just be able to be around them, or am I looking to like really run around with them, take care of them independently, etc.? And accordingly, you're able to say, hey, if this is your goal, these are the different treatment options that would offer this benefit, but also these risks. And accordingly, that's what shared decision making is,
Sure.
right? And I think that's where you can deliver hope that's not just, pie in the sky type of hope, but it's personalized, it's contextualized, and it's specific to that individual. I think that's really helpful. So I think hope is very deliverable. We just need to um, get a window into our patients' lives and establish that connection so that we can cater the message that we want to deliver to them.
I have to say, you break all my stereotypes of the hard hitting cardiologist. I don't mean at all to impugn doctors. Um, like you, my father is a doctor. And there are certainly many, many amazing doctors out there. But there's also certainly lots of stereotypes about the aloof physician that's all about the facts and kind of misses the human dimension of things. So, first, am I wrong to have that stereotype? And if I'm not totally wrong, what do you wish other doctors could incorporate into how they work with patients?
Oh, wow. Um, well, A, thank you. B, I love your receptivity as a psychologist in hearing about this. And C, I would say I don't claim to be, medicine is an art. Of course, there's science to it, but it is an art. It is a personal delivery of information and care. Um, and so everyone has their own style. And I think that's important. I think we learn from each other. Um, in terms of whether you're quote unquote wrong to have that stereotype, no, I mean, it's all going to be informed by your experience, right? And your exposure. And if you've been exposed to individuals who feel this way or come off this way, I think you're entitled to have that opinion. I will say that if I could make a collective request to our community, it would be honestly to apply the golden rule. Like I teach fellows and training or trainees rather, and I think that the minute you put yourself in the shoes of another, you're stripped of ego and you're stripped of being right or wrong, and you're just reminded of our humanness. And so I think, and I'm certainly guilty of not always doing this, but it is my intention and my prayer to try to put myself in the other person's shoes. And so when you do that, and when I'm teaching on rounds and I say, hey, listen, if this were your relative, how would you want to convey this information? What would you want to know? What are we missing? And I think that immediately catapults you to wanting to deliver your best and to wanting to be thorough and to wanting to be compassionate and empathic. And I think the more we're all reminded of that, the better we can, well, the better we'll all be for it.
Do you take your homework or do you take your work home with you? I mean, emotionally. And how do you care for yourself? I mean, you spend so much time caring for others in really hard situations. How do you care for yourself?
Oh, thanks. Um, I think that going back to the how we talked about the heart being a metaphor for the need for taking care of yourself. I love this question. I personally um, love being active. So I think the times that I'm allowed that I make time for myself to be active, to take a high intensity uh, class. I happen to do Orange Theory, not that this is a plug for them, but that really brings me a lot of joy. Yoga brings me tremendous joy because I really feel the alignment between of my mind and my body. I just there's nothing there. That's perhaps what makes me most joyful.
Hmm.
I love a meditation practice. I can't say I'm perfectly regular about it, but I am aspiring to be better and better, and I am getting better and better. Journaling is incredibly helpful for me. And I would say the number one thing is being very intentional rather, about practicing gratitude.
Hmm.
I think we all get down and out, and certainly I do bring my work home with me emotionally. I think we all do to some extent, and we can get caught up in the mind and all the thoughts and the stories we tell ourselves. Um, but the minute we practice gratitude, it brings us to the present moment. It makes us self-aware, and I think it has tremendous it just makes you feel, the practice of gratitude is just like taking a euphoria pill, right? It's just like, oh, yeah, sure, I had a difficult day, but wow, I'm grateful for this right now. I'm grateful for that right now. And I do this with my kids, I do this with my husband, and it really, really is so effective. So I think that that's a really helpful uh, practice to have.
Do you have a particular gratitude practice that you can share with us? Something that you do?
Sure. I remember I went to my brother was graduating from Harvard Business School, and at the time the dean there was Nathan Noria. Ironically, his sister is also a heart failure cardiologist who trained me at Harvard Medical School. But besides the point, someone asked him at that graduation speech, I think that was a part of his speech where he said, like, what is your secret? And he shared that every night he practiced with his daughters um, for them all to share their three thank yous. So, what were their three thank yous for that day? And I remember being so moved by that. I did not have children at the time, and my husband and I were both there. And I said, my goodness, when we have children, I would love to practice this with them. And we started then, and I'm proud to say that, like I said, my kids are 10 and 7 by the grace of God, and we do it every night. And it really, really helps. And there are days where it's not so easy, where it's like, today was a tough day. I'm not really finding it easy to talk about three things I'm grateful for. But when you're forced to do it, you realize that there always are. And it gets us away from like our inherent human negativity bias. And so that's my practice. I think it's more impactful when I write them down, because I think that's like what brings it into our prefrontal cortex even more so. And it like makes us remember it more. I can't say I'm as good about writing it down as I am verbalizing it to my family and from each other, but it's something I'm certainly working on.
Well, Dr. Anulala, that's a beautiful message to end our conversation on. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. If people want to learn more about you or more about your work, how can they go about doing that?
Oh, that would be such a joy. So I've done a prior podcast similar to this one, with a platform called the Cardio Nerds. That's a very fun but also educational platform. Certainly MountSinai.org, and Lala and Heart to Heart will get you to a prior conversation and prior information that I've shared. And then I'm also pretty active on social media via what used to be Twitter, but now is the X platform as Dr. Anulala. So that's Danulala. I share a lot of contemporary scientific information and literature, but also personal reflections and thoughts. And I would love to hear from your listeners and hopefully be in touch with you moving forward.
Well, thank you so much again for joining us on About Health.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your receptivity.
And my thanks to all of you, our listeners. You're the reason we do this, and I sincerely hope that this hour has been helpful to you. I'm David B. Feldman. If you'd like to find out more about me, you can visit my website, davidfeldmanphd.com, all one word. If you'd like to hear this week's episode again or listen to any of our past episodes, you can find them on kpfa.org. Just select About Health under the Programs page. And of course, I hope you'll continue to join us right here each week as we explore important issues impacting your health. From all of us here at About Health, may you be healthy, happy, and wise. Thanks for listening.
The love of liberty is part of the heritage of all men in all lands, everywhere. Of the people, by the people, and for the people. The words of Abraham Lincoln remind us that the opposite of democracy is oppression. The opposite of freedom is restriction and limitations on what some folks can communicate. Another reason why KPFA needs to stay independent and to broadcast without fear or favor. Support us today at kpfa.org.
Do you love KPFA? Now is your chance to get involved by participating in the local station board. Run for a seat on the board by becoming a candidate between June 1st and June 30th. Complete your candidate package located on elections.pacifica.org. Call 707-500-1910 to leave a voicemail for the election supervisor.
We're all horrified by the events happening in Gaza and Israel. This is a moment when KPFA is needed most because mainstream media's coverage of this war is not balanced and reliable. It's expensive for KPFA to continue our fair and equal coverage of this ongoing conflict, which includes broadcasting the voices of people on the ground and those speaking truth to power. If you value reliable, unfiltered news coverage, support your independent radio station today at kpfa.org. Thank you.
You're listening to 94.1 KPFA Berkeley, 89.3 KPFB Berkeley, and 88.1 KFCF in Fresno, 97.5 K248BR Santa Cruz, 94.3 K232FC in Monterey, and always online at kpfa.org.